Coordination and subordination are pretty complicated topics, and just like with commas, I'm not going to be able to cover all of the rules for these topics in this video. But I do want to at least just touch on some basic ideas and look at a couple questions that are related to these topics. Now, the point of coordination and subordination, to put it simply, is it's how you put sentences together. When you have, let's say, two complete sentences, you want to put them together, or if you have, say, a dependent or subordinate clause and an independent clause and you want to put them together, that is what these topics are about. It's how you properly punctuate and organize the sentences so that they are not only readable, but also grammatically correct. So let's look at number 20 as an example of this. Some farmers have resorted to renting hives from beekeepers to pollinate their crops, semicolon, when there is a shortage of bees, this being an expensive proposition. So with coordination is about putting together complete independent sentences. And here, when you use a semicolon, as we do in the original, as we've talked earlier, you have to make sure that both sentences are complete. And if you look at the sentence after the semicolon, it's not even really a sentence. When there is a shortage of bees, this being an expensive proposition. Being is a word that when we see it, it's almost always wrong, because being is just overused and it's just not a very good word to use in general, except in specific circumstances. But this sentence is not even a sentence. It's not a complete sentence. So we cannot use a semicolon to separate them. So for that reason, A is gone. Let's look at B. Some farmers have resorted to renting hives from beekeepers to pollinate their crops, comma, this is an expensive proposition when there's a shortage of bees. So with B, we've got two complete sentences, but we've used a comma just to separate two sentences, and this is called a comma splice. We talked about this error in an earlier video, in the commas video. But we can't just separate two complete sentences with only a comma. That's a problem with coordination. You'd have to use, for example, a conjunction there. Maybe end. End, this is an expensive proposition. So as written, B is gone. How about C? Some farmers have resorted to renting hives from beekeepers to pollinate their crops, comma, an expensive proposition when there is a shortage of bees. So this may seem a little bit of a strange choice to you, but it actually does work. Now this comma, you'd have to ask, is this a complete sentence? If it is, then we have a comma splice. And you look at it, and actually it's not a complete sentence. An expensive proposition when there is a shortage of bees. This whole phrase, this whole clause is referring to the crops. It's kind of giving us more information on the crops, and as such, it's not itself an independent complete sentence, so we can separate it from the sentence with the comma. This is a proper way of connecting these two parts of the sentence. So C looks good. With D, we use a semicolon, so again, we'd have to ask, is this part a complete sentence? And unfortunately, no. An expensive proposition when there is a shortage of bees is not a complete sentence, so we can't use a semicolon here either. So D is gone. Best choice is C. Let's look at 37. Librarians were happy to show the Subordinary collection to people who were able to visit the library, comma, so the manuscripts, too delicate to be checked out to library patrons, remained largely unexplored. The grammar of the sentence is okay. The coordination of the sentence, connecting two sentences with a comma and a conjunction, totally fine. The issue, though, is in the logic of the coordination. In other words, the logic of using the conjunction so here. Because we want to show, ultimately, contrast. That even though librarians were happy to show the Subordinary collection to those who were able to visit the library, the manuscripts were too delicate to be checked out to library patrons. So because they weren't going to be checked out, they weren't going to be looked at, so they would remain largely unexplored. So we're actually looking for something like contrast here. Not a word like so, which shows cause and effect, that something happens, so something else happens. There's no logical connection between these sentences that says that because they were happy to show the collection to people, therefore the manuscripts remain largely unexplored. That doesn't make any logical sense. We want to show contrast here. Same thing with for. It shows a kind of cause and effect relationship. That when you use for as a conjunction, it's showing that something happens for or because of something else. How about end? Same thing. End doesn't show exactly cause and effect, but it does show that two sentences are directly connected to one another. Right? They build on one another. And here we're looking for contrast, which we find in D with the word but. Librarians were happy to show the Subordinary collection to people who were able to visit the library, but the manuscripts, too delicate to be checked out to library patrons, remained largely unexplored. So here we need that word of contrast to show that even though people saw them in the library, they weren't being checked out and thus were left largely unexplored. And that but gives us the contrast, so we go with choice D. To learn more about Reason Prep's SAT, SAT subject test, and ACT video courses, go to reasonprep.com/enroll, and you can find the link in the description below the video.